Well, thank you for coming. My name is Foster Gamble, and I just love Libertopia. I go to a lot of conferences, and this is just like vacation. It's free time. For me to get to be with this many people where liberty and justice is actually the starting point rather than an awkward conversation is such a relief and so hope-giving for the future. I don't want to give you all big heads, but this group is really smart. The discussions that I've been able to have and the talks that I've been able to listen to are just at a level of discernment that is not only based on a lot of intelligence, a lot of mental skill, but also based on open-mindedness and the courage to actually think new thoughts and share them with your friends when they might not understand or they may roll their eyes or whatever. So I congratulate you on what you are doing in the world. I'm absolutely proud, and I speak for Kimberly and the whole Thrive movement as well, to be a part of this movement. And I don't have an official title for today's talk, but I know what I want to talk about is how can Thrive and Thrive movement most effectively synergize with the Liberty movement. So I want to start by just sharing our mission. I want to talk a little bit about what the Thrive movement is and what it's doing so that you're clear on that. Then I want to talk about its relationship to liberty, and then open up for some conversations. So I'm, from my science background, I know everything in the universe is a function of purpose. So I always like to start with purpose. And our mission at the Thrive movement is to catalyze informed conversations and empower self-creating strategic actions that transform the status quo so that everyone has the opportunity to thrive. And I want to give you a little bit of an update on what's going on with Thrive. Somebody said to me yesterday, I get the impression Thrive's kind of fading away, is that right? And well, you don't hear a lot about it in mainstream media, it's true. But Thrive is so much more than a movie. The movie came out almost 2 years ago now. But even the movie is continuing to grow in the number of people who are seeing it. It's now over 18 million documented views around the world, but that's considering one view, or counting one view per DVD. And people are passing the DVDs around, they're having home screenings, they're doing community screenings. Some communities have shown Thrive every week at local movie theaters since the movie came out. So I don't know what the real number is, but it's way more than that. And thank goodness for the internet. When you made a documentary film 30 years ago, if you got 50,000 people to see it, that was really a successful film. And now to be able to have it in, let's see if this, yeah, it's in 24 languages now, and there's 3 more languages that are being translated right now. Aware Guide, an online award. It's a People's Choice Award that polls the people, and it was voted Transformational Film of the Year. It's the #1 documentary in Japan. We've toured more than 30 cities with packed venues everywhere. And now what we're doing more than screenings, because most people, everywhere we go have seen it, is we're doing day-long solution summits about a lot of things that I'll be briefly touching into today. Our website, which is kept intact and beautiful by our webmaster, Rob Leslie, who I met last year here at Libertopia. And I do a lot of presentations all over the world, so I'm constantly dealing with interesting AV predicaments. And I walked into the room last year and everything was absolutely perfect. And he got me all hooked up and everything. I said, whoa, who is this guy? It was the best I'd ever seen. And so we started talking after. I found out more about who he is as a person and his interests, particularly in liberty and 9/11 truth and so forth. And we started talking, and at the end of the conference, he said, I'm kind of interested in maybe working with the Thrive movement if you have an opening. And I was very impressed with him, obviously, and a couple of months later we did, so we contacted him, and he's been working with Thrive Movement for almost a year now. We're blessed to have him. So thank you, Rob, for everything you do. Probably the result that I'm most excited about is that there are over 800 self-creating solutions groups in the Thrive Movement Network now, in 90 countries, and they're taking on over 100 issues. And when Kimberly and I set out to make this film, it was not just to make a film. It was to create a trailer for the website, because the website would have the tools for a movement. And I'm happy to say that that is, in fact, what's happening. And as you all would well understand, the fact that we're not trying to create some global centralized entity where we can control all sorts of other people and tell them what to do has allowed this to grow very fast, because we only require two things of people to sign up for in the network, sign up a solutions group. One is if you're going to use sectors, and I'll show you a graphic on that later on, but it's basically our breakdown that we did over a decade with a dozen other groups on what's a useful model for outlining a comprehensive view of all the main sectors of human endeavor. And so we finally came up with 13 actually, because worldview centers all the economics and media and science and arts and spirituality and governance and all of that. And so when we found that that was sufficiently comprehensive, then we found that when people use that model, if they choose to, then they can coordinate worldwide. So we require, if you're going to be a part of a network and if you're going to use the sector model as a tool, that you use the same titles. Even if you've got creative variations off of it, you can do that as second or third layers or whatever. But as long as we can coordinate with those titles, then it turns random activism into literally like a laser beam of effectiveness, because people are being coherent in categories. They can find each other easily and share resources and various things that we can get into. Then the only other agreement which we require of people is that their solutions involve the creation of no new violations. And if it involves any old violations, they have to be shrinking as rapidly as possible. So it's been really helpful to have that clarity about our principles. And in fact, Bruce and Cynthia Tanner are here, who are running a Thrive group in Santa Cruz, and they had an infiltrator recently, which we expected and warned people of. But they tend to expose themselves very quickly, because, correct me if I'm wrong on these details, but this guy came into the group very actively promoting things like Agenda 21 and the Federal Reserve and so forth. So people were kind of looking like, are you in the wrong group? And I guess he was pretty vehement about all of this stuff. And so we talked about it, and we talked about this. That was one of the reasons why we put those principles in there, so that they are private groups. You guys started a private group that you invited other people to join, and it has certain principles. So we could very clearly say what you're suggesting, promoting with Agenda 21 is full of violations, so it's not appropriate for you to be in this group. Go off and create your own, whatever you want to call it, and do that. So there really wasn't any argument. And as far as I know, he ended up peacefully leaving the group. And I've seen those situations turn bad if there's not that kind of clarity about the basis for association. And we're very proud that through a lot of different challenges, by the way, if you're in the back, there's a bunch of seats up here in front and filtered in. I welcome you to come on in. That Thrive has established a global reputation for accuracy, integrity, courage, and trustworthiness. And I'm sure a lot of you know in the beginning, when Thrive first came out, the right attacked us for having obviously left identifying people in the movie. And then the left caught on to that there were right people in the movie, so they attacked us on that basis, and we just kept responding as patiently and compassionately as we could. Kimberly helped me a lot with that, to just keep reminding that we never set out to make a political movie. If we invited you into the movie, it wasn't because you were left or right. It was because you knew something about the area of food or banking or whatever it was. And so I'm happy to report that that has really died down because there's just no substance to it, and there's no way that you can argue effectively, as you know, in the long run, against freedom. People would come out insisting that we should be, progressive Democrats or something like that. And we say, we would say, please go look at the film again, because in our stage 3 solution, we really acknowledge the ethical value of some of the progressive thinking, but not the violence base of it. And the same things with the right, on their particular perspectives. So and then we would, rather than telling them that they were bad or whatever, we would simply ask them a set of questions like, exactly what part of freedom are you against? Or what is your evidence that your particular party can come up with so-called enlightened leadership that would transform the world? Because for a lot of them, Obama was the evidence. In the beginning, this was going to do it. Well, that has quieted down. I did a I did a screening in Marin, 100 progressives in a very large living room, and I asked them at that time, a year ago, how many of you still believe what Obama promised and believe that he can actually transform this situation? And out of 100, there were 5 of them at that point. And that's probably down to 1 or none by now. So the weight of the evidence in the world is really arguing for what each of you have been coming up with in your own path. So the punchline of Thrive, I was really blessed to be able to spend my entire life researching for this movie, and then to spend 8 years making the movie and the website. And the punchline of all of it, after following the money and going into the critical issues in all 13 sectors and all that kind of stuff, and when you finally get down to solutions, the punchline is liberty. And that's one reason I'm especially delighted to be here, and especially to explore how can Thrive synergize with what the liberty movement is doing. Because I know, from a lot of personal experience that one of the challenging things for the liberty movement has been reaching enough people to make a difference. And I can tell you, as I did, Thrive's reaching a lot of people. And it's just the beginning for media like this. And when Kimberly and I have visited more than 30 cities around the world with the screenings and solutions workshops, when we talk about solutions that are based on what's really going on rather than the mainstream media, and that is based on the principles of liberty in the solutions rather than polarity politics, an audience of 500-600 people will just rise to their feet and start applauding. And this is every country we've been in, whether it's Los Angeles or Boise or Taos or whatever. This is what we're seeing. And Kimberly, we would talk after our presentations again and again. It's like, do you think this is happening in a lot of places? And finally, by the end, we realized, no, this is the hologram. This is the fractal that's happening all over the world. And with the internet, we're blessed to receive 1,000 communications a day in all different languages. We spend half our time on Google Translate just trying to figure out what people are saying. And people are so thankful for finally a coherent story coming out of America. And then one that actually ties together all these seemingly bizarre individual pieces. Because I want to tell you that, I am with lots of different groups and on radio and TV programs and so forth, and sometimes it's UFOs, sometimes it's conservative talk shows, sometimes it's banking stuff, do corporate presentations and so forth. Sometimes it's consciousness, spirituality groups. Sometimes it's engineers talking about alternative energy and so forth. And within a few minutes, it's basically the same conversation that's going on. And people want to be engaged in the conversation of what the heck is really happening and what can we do about it. And what is surfacing again and again in terms of what we can do about it is that there's this fundamental navigating principle of nonviolation that most people have never heard of. I had never heard of it 10 years ago. I was introduced to it by my son, who was a former Libertopia attendee, and was patient enough. He was patient enough with me, and then thankfully I was open-minded enough with him to not have to assume the role of know-it-all. And we had intense discussions, arguments, so forth for months while I was trying to defend my old worldviews. And as I mentioned to a group yesterday, I finally began to realize I was in a logical fog and feeling very awkward about that. And then when I get to the morality part, I felt like I was sinking in quicksand. And I would start to argue something, and he'd just be looking at me like, really? And finally, I just crossed a tipping point, and I said, you know, I'm really starting to get this. So I spent the next 3 years studying all that I could, and then, you know, the next 7 years after that, trying to communicate it in as effective ways as possible. And I feel like that's only just beginning, but it's part of what I want to talk with you about today, because I think the Thrive movement can help in certain ways that I think that the Liberty movement could really use some assistance. And especially with things that I've learned from Kimberly, really bringing in the feminine energy. I'm really delighted to see how many women are here at Libertopia this year. It's increasing all the time, and we're hearing more and more from women all over the planet, and it's critical because there is, you know, people have heard enough angry, ranting males that they're sick of it, and they just turn it off. And, you know, I have enough challenge out there talking about ETs and free energy and conspiracy and banking scams and all of that. But you know, the most challenging thing for me to talk about is liberty. And as you know, because it's, even though everybody that I've ever talked to agrees that they don't want to be violated against their will, when I then take that to, well, then isn't involuntary taxation a violation, and therefore our entire civilization built on a violation? You know, then you get into the, you know, they get that look in the face, and then, but what about this, and what about, you know, the whole thing that everyone in this room has gone through, I'm sure, many times. And that, to me, is the conversation of probably the next 50 years on this planet. I think it's the most critical conversation for humanity on planet Earth at this time in history. In fact, I think that the fate of humanity and the health of the planet depends on it. So we need to be able to have that conversation more and more effectively. And we have a lot to learn from the women about how they want to be shared with, and how they would like us to speak, and how they would like to be really empowered in their voice. And Kimberly and I have been working creatively together on this for about 7 or 8 years now. It's a tremendously exciting learning path for me. So I want to just share with you a short clip from the movie. If anybody hasn't seen the movie or don't remember this particular, the whole movie leads up to the solution section, and then this is the punchline.
This vision of a thriving world is based on what could be called the liberty perspective. There is a simple principle that underlies this approach: non-violation. Nobody gets to violate you or your property, and you don't get to violate anyone else, except in genuine self-defense. This is the one rule I've found that every single person agrees with, at least for themselves. I believe that non-violation is the true north of humanity's moral compass and our core navigating insight. This insight can guide us and protect each and every individual as we set up voluntary, self-sustaining systems. It is a way of living that I can stand for wholeheartedly and without reservation. I've been profoundly influenced by the work of Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises, who developed a whole philosophy and economic system based on the core ethic of non-aggression. Motivated by having witnessed the ravages of communism and fascism in Europe, he committed his life to finding a just way. He recognized that those systems, as well as socialism and even democracy, wrongly assume the rights of the collective, or the group, to be more important than those of the individual. I had always gone along with the view that more people will thrive if we consider the group's needs above the individual's. But when I took a closer look, I found it doesn't really work that way. In the name of what's best for the group, Governments have been responsible for most of the war, death, and destruction on the planet. More than 200 million individuals were killed in the 20th century alone. So how would applying the principle of non-violation change this dynamic? It would take us from incremental change of a fundamentally flawed system to a complete transformation where not just some, or even the majority, but everyone could truly have the opportunity to thrive.
I'm so glad that I got exposed to this thinking before I basically opened myself to the world because I finally felt like I found my own ethical, moral, intellectual center. And now going all over the world and being grilled by people from all different perspectives, I feel a sense of peace that I never felt in my entire life. And I'm always eager to learn from people who can show me flaws in my approach to anything. But there's no question that I feel embarrassed or afraid to answer. If I don't know the answer, I just say I don't know. But when it comes to, okay, but we should do this and we should do that, when you can simply ask people, well, is it voluntary? Does it involve coercing anyone? Are you going to need a gun to make people do that? It's just such a relief, as you know. So I want to acknowledge Steph Molyneux because I'm sad that he isn't here this year. I think he made a wise decision not to be, and he's really taking care of himself. But when I found him, thanks to my son, I really felt like I'd probably found, at least for me, the most compelling and important philosopher in history for me. So I've been studying him a lot for many years. And I wanted to particularly share this quote because it's the one that sums it up so powerfully for me. He said, "The greatest fight in the history of the world and the world of ideas is the fight to establish a universal morality." I grew up in a Republican family. I moved to California and spent 30 years as a kind of disinterested progressive. And so I've heard a lot of arguments for relative morality. And sometimes even backed up by, well, Einstein proved that everything's relative, so everybody's got their own moral system. And to be able to actually say, no, there actually is a right and wrong that each of us can experience directly and don't want to have done to us is, I think, a kind of beacon. It's like a lighthouse during stormy times that is serving really well. So what is Thrive trying to do to help wake people up and to promote the message of liberty in the world? Well, the main objectives of our mission for the next 2 years are, first of all, to spread and stabilize what we call the solutions hub to self-sufficiency, where it's really sustaining and working on its own and people are being empowered by one another. So let me talk a little bit about the solutions hub. Those of you who have seen the film might remember this scene where we talk about the fundamental structure of the universe, the mother geometry from which all the other crystal forms, flower symmetries, everything comes. Bucky Fuller called the vector equilibrium. And it's this geometry, these white lines, but it's got 12 vertices around a single center. And the distance between them is all the same, between one and its neighbors. And it's the only geometry for which that's true. And that's why they call it the vector equilibrium, because all of the vectors, all these lines that represent energy, direction, and power are all the same. It's a system in equilibrium. And that's why you never see it in nature, because the material world is not in equilibrium. It's a contraction out of that, what they used to call the vacuum. I think it's more accurately a plenum of complete energy. The forms materialize out of that and then or die back into, but that's the geometry of the fundamental field of equilibrium. So it turns out that if you're trying to stabilize a hub on a bicycle wheel or something like that, you need if you still use the old wire spokes, you would need a minimum of 12 to stabilize the hub. So we used that same model, came up with the 12 titles, and then the center one is worldview, because every sector that you're dealing with through your own worldview. So when you bring that down to a 2D graphic, then you've got all of the different sectors around the outside: health, infrastructure, justice, media, relations, science, spirituality, arts, economics, education, environment, and all of our favorites, governance. That's going to be very soon self-governance as people wake up to what that really is. But there's also other layers here. What we recommend, that people come to us all the time saying, I'm finally getting it, I'm waking up, I want to take action, what shall I do? Where shall I go? Tell me what to do. And you say, no, we just want to help empower you to do your own calling. And a lot of people go, my what? And so what we do in our solutions workshops is we ask people to, first of all, write down your purpose in life. Most people haven't done that. A lot of people haven't done it. In fact, it's an awkward question I discovered socially. You know, if you're at a party, you just met someone, hi, I'm Foster, what's your purpose in life? You know, I found out people aren't used to that, but frankly, it is what I'm most interested in about you. And then the other stuff kind of comes after that. So I want to know what your impression of what you're up to. It's dance time, everybody. So we ask people to write down their best version of their purpose. And then once you've got that, then ask yourself, if you want to get active, what sector are you most interested in? Which one of these draws you most? And it may be a couple, it may be 3. But ideally pick one that is most compelling for you. And then ask yourself, what is the level of engagement that feels most appropriate to me? Are you someone who wants to meet immediate needs? You know, work in a soup kitchen. If you're a doctor, go Doctors Without Borders, or something where you're actually taking care of an unmet immediate need right now. Now, some people are more interested in systemic change because they're systems thinkers, and they might think it's going to be more highly leveraged if there's all these people starving rather than handing out food. If I can change the system so that they're not starving, that might be a more highly leveraged action. It's not better or worse. It's just a different place of entry. And then the third one is the consciousness shift, because all of our systems come out of the worldviews of the people who are creating those systems. So if you can actually shift worldview, it's a super highly leveraged place to then come out with systems that are actually sustainable, and then you end up with needs actually being met in a natural way. So as we traveled around the world, we found that people were creating these groups. So we created a hub on the net where people could find each other. And because our purpose was not to try to interact with what I think today it was 847 groups around the world. So what we wanted to do was empower them so that they could find each other by sector, find someone else who's interested in environment, find them by region if you want to actually get together with them or work on your local problems, or by issue. So if your particular issue is GMOs or chemtrails or banking scams or different aspects of liberty, you can actually look up and find other people. This is a picture of the search bar by particular issues. This is down to the beginning of C's. There's over 100 of these now. So you can literally click on those, on one of those, and the whole list of the groups in the Thrive Network who are taking on that issue will appear. So the point is that then if you're doing a petition, you just put it out to all those groups as well as people outside the network. Or if you need a petition, you go online and you see, because there's an archive where people post resources, and you can just download it and improve it if you want to, but you don't have to spend all the time thinking about it, so that you don't have hundreds of groups around the world all having to recreate the same wheel. Same thing with finding funding sources, or creating class action lawsuits, or what are good resources and that type of thing. And we consider this to be still a pretty rudimentary version, but we're learning, and we're getting feedback from this different solutions group coordinators as to how to improve it. And in the next few months, we'll be doing a whole another version that will make it even easier, more effective for people to share best practices. So our point is really to connect these groups all around the world using the global brain of the internet, because a lot of people, still think that the state is all powerful. But if you've ever seen like a bear running from a swarm of bees or something like that, you realize that there is a tremendous power in numbers. And the numbers really are on the side of justice and truth and the life force and love and compassion and so forth. So the would-be controllers, their biggest fear, of course, is that people are going to wake up to the actual truth and start getting organized. Kimberly and I were involved back in 2007 in Santa Cruz, California, when they started, all of a sudden we started having planes droning over our head, dropping this spray that was supposed to confuse the mating of a little tiny light brown apple moth that was supposedly going to devastate agriculture in California and then across the country. The only problem was it actually wasn't doing any damage at all. And the one place where it had done some damage was in New Zealand. So we sent some scientists over there to figure out what happened. And of course, they were doing monoculture with a ton of phosphate fertilizers and insecticides, pesticides. They ruined the ecology, so there weren't any predators anymore for the insects, and they got completely out of balance. So they went back to polyculture, they went back to natural farming, and then this little moth wasn't a problem anymore. So, but anyway, they were starting to spray us, and it looked very suspicious. And with what Kimberly and I knew, we suspected the worst. But at that point in 2007, if we'd just gone around, even in Santa Cruz, saying, hey, the global domination agenda right from the president is trying to depopulate by spraying poisons on 7 million people in Northern California, they might have locked us up. So we had to be kind of careful on how we brought out what information. But we brought together 30 activists in our living room and taught them this sector model. And they got very excited about it. 2 nights later, we had a meeting a town hall meeting in Santa Cruz, where about 300 people showed up for this issue. Some informative lectures took place, Q&A, and then afterward we had 12 tables set up that reflected each sector. So on the way out, people who were motivated could actually sign up by sector. So now the lawyers had a place to go, and the scientists had a place to go, and the media people, and the spiritual people, and the relations people who were good at conflict resolution and so forth. The artists could go, and we just simply set up a schedule where each week, each sector would meet and brainstorm what they could do about this. And then a self-selected, from the group, they would select somebody who would go on a Sunday night to meet with the representatives from each of the other groups. And they would bring all the information together, brainstorm, and then that information would come back to each sector. We called that the synergy team, the one in the middle. So now we had the vector equilibrium structure, we had the toroidal communication, and we were aligning with natural systems. And the long and short of it was, I was on the follow the money team, because I've had some experience with that. And it took us only about a month to track the money back. And sure enough, this was a personal, handwritten, they don't call it an earmark when the president does it. I think it's a budget adjustment or something like that. But anyway, he had earmarked close to $1 billion to spray 7 million people 9 months a year for up to 10 years. And they wouldn't even tell us what was in the spray. We finally got Schwarzenegger, who was the governor at that point, to stop them and make them reveal what was in the spray. And our worst suspicions were confirmed. There were carcinogens, mutagens, endocrine disruptors, to destroy fertility. It was a destruction plan to make people sick, to change their genes, and to keep them from reproducing. Because we got the truth, and we had the media people already engaged, and then when the moms got involved, when the moms started coming to protest with their babies in strollers saying, you're not spraying my kid with these poisons, that got media attention immediately. And the long and short of it was that in 6 months, for about a total of $30,000 to $40,000, plus a whole lot of volunteer time, we stopped a presidential program that came out of Homeland Security, and they ran for the hills. We won one lawsuit, and the second one was still pending, and they quit and went away. And our trophy for that accomplishment was through the Freedom of Information Act. We got an internal email from the CDFA, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, where one group was writing to another group after we'd gotten started on this, and it said, "We expected some resistance from Santa Cruz. We just didn't know it would be so well organized." So that's a whole systems model based on natural principles, navigating through liberty. In fact, let me add one more thing, because this will be important to this group. I ended up getting vilified by a few people from Monterey who were very genuinely active in trying to stop this and so forth. But they were in a traditional paradigm where their solution was, we got to get legislation through Sacramento so that they got to take a vote before they spray us with this stuff. And so, I probably would have thought that 15 years ago also. So we had a few public meetings where I said, this is what it all comes down to. If you think because you could persuade a majority of probably uninformed people that somebody should be able to spray me and my grandchildren and our organic garden with toxic poisons, then that reveals the problem with our so-called governance, because you're putting majority rule ahead of individual rights and health and all that stuff. So that particular guy who really went after me for that never got it, but a lot of other people did. And it wasn't go ahead with your legislative stuff. I'm not going to try and stop you. But meanwhile, we're going to do all the rest of this stuff, which thankfully worked before anybody got legislation in authorizing people to vote about spraying poisons on others. So then we've got a section of the website which just features exciting stories from what various groups are doing. Some of these groups have 2 people in them. We went to Boise, Idaho. Did a screening there, and 650 people turned out. We went to Taos, and 500 people turned out. It's like people are so hungry for the truth and something that they can do about it. Okay, so the second in our 2-year mission is we're going to launch an online TV channel called Thrive TV. And it's really intended to empower true liberty thinking. Because I had the unpleasant task of writing hundreds of articles for our website. There are 5 or 6 critical issues in all 12 sectors and another 8 topics. And we start with a vision, then we do the critical issues, then we do suggested solution strategies. And writing about the critical issues was really a depressing task until I finally started to realize that, wait a minute, there's common themes in these problems. They're all human-made, and therefore can be human-fixed if we get them early enough. They're all being perpetrated by actually a very small number of people who were doing it deceptively. So if that can get exposed, that can go away, and then the real, the beauty and compassion of the human spirit of most individuals can come forward. And then the final point I got was that liberty actually can solve virtually all of these problems. So I started making a list of what would go away if we actually had a voluntarist society. So let me just give you a little glimpse of my list. World wars or wars of aggression, nuclear weapons and radiation, immigration problems, subsidies, bailouts, monopolies, taxes, eminent domain, emergency powers, surveillance and privacy intrusion, police states, stop and frisk, control over our marriages, bodies, intrusion into our bank accounts and travels, unsound currency, lobbyists, executive orders, signing statements, Citizens United, gerrymandering of political districts, military drafts, suppression of indigenous rights, protection of polluters, suppression of UFO ET information, suppression of free energy, suppression of alternative health devices and remedies, the military-industrial complex, fiat money, and GMOs and aspartame and fluoride, and the list goes on and on and on. But the notion that all of that is a function of this, as Larkin calls it, the superstition, this illusion that anybody should have authority over anyone else, is a really exciting prospect to me, because it allows us to focus this laser beam on, okay, here's these really a boundless number of issues. But if they're all just symptoms of this core problem, that's actually really good news. And that's obviously one of the reasons why we want to focus so much energy on helping to get this word out.
In other words, freedom's the answer. What's the question?
Right. And then finally, we are launching what we're calling Thrive Connect, because a lot of innovators have approached us, from social projects to technical inventions, and a lot of people of wealth have approached us trying to figure out how to make more of a difference in the world, because the world that they're trying to pass on to their grandchildren is collapsing. And so that's in its very early stages, but I'm very excited about the things that are happening, and that could end up really synergizing a lot of different projects and hopefully empowering a lot of the key work that's being done on a shoestring with the money that is deserved and could be used so well. This is a quick sample of, these are the various sectors, and each of these little nodes represent projects that we're actively working with in each of the different sectors right now. A lot of people got bored by the notion of infrastructure sector. Doesn't sound very interesting, but this is where the new energy technologies are. So these are all different groups that we're working with doing that. Okay, how to transition. Because the two key things I want to offer, besides the fact that we're having the privilege of reaching a lot of people with a message, and the core of our message is liberty, the two things that Kimberly and I feel like the Thrive movement can offer is, one, to help with thinking on transition strategies. Because I have found that there is, in the liberty group, tremendous intellectual power and a lot of homework done on the logic, the morals, and how things could be. But in terms of the transition from here to there, it's a lot of crickets. A lot of silence in that area, even amongst the people that I've read. You know, when I came across Rothbard finally saying, okay, well, there's going to need to be some compromises in the transition, but what we need to do is keep the goal in mind and then not create any new violations along the way. I thought, okay, that makes some sense. So I really want to encourage everyone to begin opening up the conversation of what are solutions, strategies that could work for transition. And I want to show this clip from the movie quickly to give a sense of our suggestion for that transition.
We can't do everything at once. I envision 3 overlapping stages of the solutions process. In stage 1, we bring as much integrity as possible to our current systems. If we cut the U.S. military budget in half, it would still roughly equal the defense spending of the entire rest of the world. Between that and getting rid of the Federal Reserve, over $1 trillion a year would be freed, enough to feed everyone on our planet, deal with social issues, and heal our environment. Many people believe that widespread starvation and poverty are inevitable, but compared to war, eliminating poverty and restoring the environment are cheap. According to Lester Brown's Earth Policy Institute, it would take under $200 billion a year to restore the Earth's environment and meet global social goals. But this stage isn't the end goal of the liberty perspective. While stage 1 has a lot of the compassion typically associated with a liberal Democrat agenda, stage 2 reflects much of the wisdom of the traditional conservative worldview. In stage 2, we shrink government's role to protecting individual liberty and stewarding things we share in common, like ecosystems and the airwaves we use to communicate. As the system gains integrity and we move to sound currency, People will have enough money to have more control over everything that affects them. Stage 3 grows out of the increasing freedom that people gain in stages 1 and 2, as they have more money and more time. There is no involuntary tax and therefore no involuntary governance. There's no monopoly on force. There are rules, but no rulers. Rigorously protecting individual rights turns out to be key for honoring our interdependence. We can be distinct and unified at the same time. As utopian as this can sound at first, I've been thrilled to see how much practical thinking has been done to deal with tough issues like healthcare, crime, and education. These 3 stages validate the best of both the liberal and conservative perspectives that have divided us for so long, and then reconcile them at a new level, around non-violation, a core ethic we all share. Stage 3 honors human incentive and finally includes the rights of not just many, not just most, but everyone. The torus provides a template for a society based on integrity and wholeness. It conserves what's working. It has built-in feedback so it can self-correct and innovate to maintain balance. We can apply these and other features of the torus dynamic to our human social systems. I truly believe that aligning consciously with the fundamental life energy pattern at every level, physical, emotional, mental, interpersonal, and environmental, is ultimately the art, the science, and the celebration of love. And that's what we're here to learn.
So in honoring Larkin, who couldn't be here this year either, and who's been a tremendous influence on me, I want to just read this seminal paragraph from his Most Dangerous Superstition. This is on page 1, it's the punchline of the whole book. Everything else is the detail. The belief in authority, which includes all belief in government, is irrational and self-contradictory. It is contrary to civilization and morality and constitutes the most dangerous, destructive superstition that has ever existed. Rather than being a force for order and justice, the belief in authority is the archenemy of humanity. Okay, I'm not going to go into this now, but I want to talk in general about the topic. Kimberly and I did a video blog recently on how to share difficult information with your friends without losing your friendships. Because everywhere we've traveled, in every single person we realized in every audience that we get to be with is facing that challenge, and hardly anybody's talking about it. So we've learned a lot, mostly the hard way. And so we did a video blog on the 9 top tips that we recommend have been helpful to us. And we're getting a lot of positive feedback from all over the world that, oh yeah, I could ask questions instead of trying to cram my knowledge down their throat. Or I could maybe not bring it up during the, wedding celebration. And the more we distinguish facts from our interpretation or our speculation, the more credibility we keep. And so we're all in the process of developing this art. And when my son Trevor was engaged in the liberty conversation with Kimberly and me for several months, Kimberly almost didn't go there. And it was challenging for me, but even more challenging for her. And I've never met a more brilliant person on the planet or more compassionate than Kimberly. So it wasn't a matter of that. And she said, when she knew I was going to be talking about this, we talked over dinner about what she would want to share if she were here. And the main thing she said was that in listening to Trevor, listening to Steph, listening to Larkin and others, she really got the logic. She really got the passion and commitment. But what she didn't hear from her particular listening was the compassion for the people who are so injured by the current system. For what happens with them in the next month, in the next 2 years, in the transition. So we engaged in a many-year conversation about, okay, how can, and what was just described here, how can you use money that would otherwise go to the Federal Reserve and wars and the military and so forth to help in that transition? And it's not a purist approach. Someone said to me, logically yesterday, well, you're using unethical means during the transition of taxes to try to accomplish an ethical end. And as I've really investigated that in myself, the whole problem of the challenge of ethics is right at the core of it. And for me, and for some of my friends like Larkin and Johnny Liberty and others who spent time in jail, oftentimes they've adjusted their thinking to include themselves in the ethics. That they might have to compromise in something like being willing to go ahead and bite your lip and pay the taxes for a while in order to protect your own relative freedom during the interim while you're trying to be as effective as you can at solving the whole thing. And to me, it's like that with taxes. If you want to wait for what I call the poof strategy, one of these days, if we just keep talking about liberty, all of a sudden it's going to go poof and we're going to be there. Then, okay, that's one approach. But meanwhile, you're probably paying your taxes, even though you don't like to. So you're already doing an unethical act. And would you rather have those taxes go to bombing the hell out of Syria, et cetera, subsidies, all that kind of stuff, or would you rather have it go to a more liberty-based strategy and helping with the transition to organic farming and helping with healthcare and housing and so forth for those most disadvantaged for some period of time, but completely within the conversation of the goal in mind. We are going there. Let's say it's going to take 8 years or 12 years or something like that. All of this is going to be done in the context of don't get used to these entitlements because they're going to be tapering and then disappearing. So you've got a grace period if you really need it to get your act together, get your community together, and so forth. So one point that Kimberly made was that just to remind liberty thinkers that when you're sharing the liberty conversation, to make sure that you're not emotionally or verbally or just in your tone, that you're not violating the person you're wanting to convince by the way that you're communicating it. And it's a really important point. I think that we all can stand to remember, because I think a lot of the challenge for the survival and thriving of humanity is more and more people not only getting liberty, but being effective in not just expressing it. Like Larkin is self-proclaimed fire breather. It's easy to get into fire breathing mode with it. Now he's finally said to me recently that he finally feels like he's found the Aikido of the liberty conversation, where he's actually blending and leading in workshops where there's no resistance coming up. And that, I think, is a worthy challenge for all of us, and I think that the fate of humanity rests in the balance. So let me finally share one quick little video segment that I love. It's really in honor of all of you, because you guys are my heroes.
Why, Mr. Anderson? Why? Why? Why do you do it? Why? Why get up? Why keep fighting? You believe you're fighting for something, for more than your survival? Can you tell me what it is? Do you even know? Is it freedom or truth? Perhaps peace? Could it be for love? Illusions, Mr. Anderson, vagaries of perception. temporary constructs of a feeble human intellect trying desperately to justify an existence that is without meaning or purpose, and all of them as artificial as the Matrix itself, although only a human mind can invent something as insipid as love. You must be able to see it, Mr. Anderson. You must know it by now. You can't win. It's pointless to keep fighting. Why, Mr. Anderson? Why? Why do you persist?
Because I choose to.
Because I choose to. So we've got about 4 minutes to interact. I'm sorry it's not longer. But I really want to thank you for attending and for the ongoing inspiration that you give to me and to Kimberly and to the Thrive movement. It makes all the difference, and we look forward to being able to offering back as much as we can. So any questions? Any comments? Bernard?
The animation from war to prosperity, do you have that on your website? A clip, that one clip of the animation that you showed?
I'm not sure. Probably. Probably.
Visual.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's a scene in the movie, but I think we do have it. If you go to our YouTube channel, just put in Thrive Movement on YouTube, and you'll get a whole listing by sector and topic of all of our clips that are online. Yeah. Yes.
You seem to be against GM foods and very much for organic. I mean, is that a local thing to the California movement? I mean, what if you're pro-GM and you don't really care about organic?
Well, I fear for your health, number one, because the evidence that I and so many others, Jeffrey Smith and others have come up with over the years is that the GM foods really...
the scientific community doesn't agree with you.
Well, the corporate scientific community whose job depends, the studies coming out of Monsanto and Syngenta.
So if you join your movement, then you have to be anti-GM and really pro-organic food. Is that what you're saying?
No, but whatever solutions you propose shouldn't involve violation. No, you don't have to agree with everything. It's just whatever action you're actually going to take needs to not violate anyone else. Yes. Anyone else? Yes.
For that statement, I mean, basically you're against monopolies in agriculture, which are pushing GM, right?
Well, in my research, monopolies don't really occur unless you've got the state to protect them.
No, right,
so, yeah.
exactly, right. So we're basically against this monopoly that is, telling us that GM is not bad and GM is okay, and it's...
Well, I'm against the deceptive promotion, and I'm against them coercively forcing farmers to take in these seeds that don't reproduce, and I'm against their trying to take over evolution itself. Yeah.
Well, can I throw something out as far as how that's actually violating? When you throw a whole bunch of GM, seeds out there, it's going to affect the crops that are in the nearby areas. So that if you don't want to have it in your crop, it's going to end up in your crop anyways because it gets blown by the natural
I don't want to get into an argument, but that's all mythology, I'm afraid. I mean, the scientific evidence is not the case. And there's a lot of powerful interests that want to expand the market for organic foods just as much as they're interested want to expand the market for other products.
So wouldn't it be great to have on national television debates from including people from all the different perspectives? Unfortunately, I haven't seen Monsanto and Syngenta and so forth. I haven't seen them willing to engage in that for some reason. Okay, we're done with time, and the next speaker needs to come on. Thank you very much.